And now the answers to the previous episode's trivia questions. In order to rescue the princess, Luke and Han pretended to be stormtroopers, transferring Chewbacca from which cell block? 1138. According to Princess Leia, what was Grand Moff Tarkin holding? Vader's leash. Hello and welcome to a fan reads Bantha Tracks. This is issue number 8 and it is an interview with George Lucas. So let's begin. Let's see what Bantha Tracks has to ask George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, one of the best movies ever made. Tell us about your childhood. I grew up in Modesto, California and spent a pretty normal childhood there. Until I was 18, I had planned to be a race car driver, but then I had a terrible car accident. While I was in the hospital recuperating, I began to think about going to college. College offered psychology, anthropology, and other such subjects not taught in high school. When did you become interested in film? I had been accepted at San Francisco State College and planned to go there until a friend of mine suggested that I go to the University of Southern California, where he was planning to go. I didn't know what I would study there, but he suggested the film department, saying that it was very easy and that anyone can get through it. I thought that sounded great and managed to get accepted. Once there, I was completely captivated by film. What was it specifically that excited you about film? Mainly using camera and editing. I was much more drawn to the visual side of film than to the writing. I never was pretty good at writing and found that preparing scripts was pretty boring, but I did well in the visual aspects and loved making abstract movies, documentaries, tone poems, none of which I really had to sit down and write. Instead, I could construct them in the editing room. I found that my primary interest was not in working with actors, but in working with film as pure film. Your first feature film, THX 1138, was an extension of a student film you had done at USC. How did the feature version become about? I knew that I wanted to make a film, but I felt that I should hire a writer to do the screenplay. At that point, I was working as Francis Coppola's assistant. He encouraged me to write my own script, saying that I'd never be a good director if I didn't learn to write. Francis is a good storyteller and an extremely good writer, and he encouraged me to start writing. Through his influence, I began working on my writing and moving toward more theatrical writing that would incorporate actors. So I turned out my first script, THX 1138, and it was really terrible, I'm afraid. Finally, I asked Walter Murch to help on it, and together we wrote the script that I eventually shot. My interest in making THX came largely from my long-standing desire to do something in the space fantasy genre. It's a fairly pessimistic film, I think, and a parable of modern-day life. I shot the film on real locations, but slightly exaggerated and distorted things to create an interesting, somewhat futuristic look. THX and Star Wars are both space fantasy films, yet are very different, with THX more experimental and Star Wars basically an action-adventure type film. Which type do you prefer? Now, I'm going to have to object to this, because THX 1138 does not take place in space. And I don't think it has anything fantasy about it, because to me fantasy would be, magic or the Force, something that we can't normally have. So THX would be more like, dystopian future, but a space fantasy? I don't think so. Okay, back to George. That's like asking, which do I like better, ice cream or Hershey bars? They're both good and both have their attractive aspects. In my heart, though, I probably lean toward the more experimental type of film. I'd like to do more of this sort of film, but not for distribution. So that should relieve any worry about whether or not those films would be marketable or commercial. At one point, there were going to be 12 Star Wars films. I cut that number down to 9 because the other 3 were tangential to the saga. Star Wars was the 4th story in the saga and was to have been called Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, but I decided people wouldn't understand the numbering system, so we dropped it. For Empire, though, we're putting back the number and we'll call it Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back. Wow. After the 3rd film in this trilogy, we'll go back and make the first trilogy, which deals with the young Ben Kenobi and the young Darth Vader. Wonder how long that's going to take. I'd love to see that. What is the 3rd trilogy about? It deals with the character that survived Star Wars 3 and his adventures. Very mysterious. I've heard a rumor that in editing Empire, you made changes in the content of the story, changes that the cast wasn't aware of. There are always changes that occur during the editing process, changes that the cast wouldn't be informed of. But we didn't make any drastic alterations. Obviously, scenes were cut down and things were lost, but no scenes were cut out completely. To many people, R2-D2 was the star of Star Wars. How did you develop that character? The truth is that when I was mixing the soundtrack for American Graffiti with the sound editor Walter Murch, we were working with a number of dialogue tracks and about 12 reels of film. Walter asked me to go to the rack and get R2-D2, Reel 2, Dialogue Track 2. When I heard that, I thought, what a great name that would be, and wrote it down in my little book. When I was developing the character of the little robot in Star Wars, I developed it around that name. What new characters are in The Empire Strikes Back? There's Han Solo's friend Lando Calrissian, who is played by Billy D. Williams, and there's another new character, Yoda, the Jedi Master, who teaches Luke about being a Jedi. Was Lando created in response to criticism about the lack of non-Caucasians in Star Wars? Not really. I had always intended Lando to be a black man. The criticisms about Star Wars were blown away out of proportion since there were no minority groups represented among the leads, although there were blacks in the film.
From Kenner, it's the Star Wars mini action figure collector's case. Action figures sold separately. The collector's case holds 24 Star Wars action figures, like Stormtrooper, R5-D4, and Snaggletooth. It comes with 2 plastic trays to keep them in, or you can turn the trays over and display all your figures in action poses. You can pack up Star Wars action figures and take them with you.
The Star Wars mini action figure collector's case. Action figures each sold separately. From Kenner.
Will Lando become a more prominent character as the saga continues? Yes, he has a prominent part in the next film. How do you think Star Wars and Empire compare? Empire is a much different film than Star Wars. It's a rather sad film, more of a tragedy than a comedy. As the second part of this trilogy, it compares with the second act in a play. Everything goes wrong in the second act, and then everything is resolved in the third and final act. In my opinion, Empire is a better film than the first one was. Why did you choose not to direct Empire? I've never really enjoyed directing, so I have more or less retired from directing. I felt that if I directed Empire, I'd have to direct the next one, and the one after that, and so on for the rest of my life. What are your plans for the 3rd story in this trilogy? Revenge of the Jedi. Ooh, sounds good. We plan to begin pre-production on that film in January 1981. I'm writing the screenplay alone this time. Also, I won't be directing Jedi, so we'll find another director for the project. It will probably go into production late in 1981 and should be finished and released by spring of 1983. That's awesome! The Star Wars films have a fairy tale quality. Yes, I agree. As a student of anthropology, I've always been interested in the role myths and fairy tales play in educating young people about behavior in society. Before I did Star Wars, I was aware of the lack of fairy tales in contemporary life and aware that the number of parents who read fairy tales to their children was dwindling. As more families break up, children aren't being read to at bedtime anymore and instead spend long hours in front of a television set. As a result, they learn their mythology from television. Unfortunately, television conveys no sense of morality since it is itself amoral. Okay? So unless the child has very strong family life or is involved with his religion, there's no real anchor to grab onto. When I developed Star Wars, I thought of it as a contemporary fairy tale with values and a moral point of view. I think because of that, it has a universal, permanent appeal. Well, that concludes the interview with George Lucas. How about some Star Wars trivia? According to C-3PO, at what does R2-D2 excel? How fast will the Millennium Falcon go? The answers to these trivia questions will be given on the next video. If you don't know the answers, that's okay. Just go see Star Wars again. Or ask a friend who's seen it a lot. Because how else would you get the answers? Unfortunately, there's no Q&A in this issue. But it says, the saga continues. Now that The Empire Strikes Back has been completed, Lucasfilm Limited is preparing to start work on the third film in the Star Wars saga to be called Revenge of the Jedi. Revenge of the Jedi will complete the middle trilogy of the 9-part Star Wars epic. Following its completion, the first trilogy will be filmed, and then finally, the last trilogy. Should production on the 9 films continue at the same rate, we can expect to see the 9th film released in the spring of 2001. Ooh, that's gonna take forever! I don't know if I can wait! Alright, let's see what else is in here. That phone number, that it's called 800-521-1980 Revisited. In our last issue, we announced a special Star Wars telephone line giving information on The Empire Strikes Back. This line, on which you can receive messages from C-3PO, Darth Vader, Han Solo, and Luke Skywalker, proved so popular that we had to add 7 additional lines to handle the load. Wow! Even so, the number of incoming calls has been so great that it's still hard to get through. For those members of the fan club who have been unsuccessful in reaching this special line, we are publishing the transcripts of all the messages. Alright, here's the transcripts from the messages. Oh, here's C-3PO.
Hello, I am C-3PO, and this is the first of a series of messages on the special Star Wars telephone line. Each time one of you on Earth calls this number, you will receive a message giving information on the continuation of the Star Wars saga, The Empire Strikes Back. After Star Wars, I hoped that all my adventures were over, and R2-D2 wouldn't get us into any more trouble with his secret missions. But in The Empire Strikes Back, it just gets worse. First, there was that dreadful snow planet. I thought I'd never be warm again. Then we were attacked by Imperial stormtroopers, and when we got to the Cloud City, I just went all to pieces. Oh dear. I can't go on. Talking about it is too upsetting. You'll just have to see it for yourselves when The Empire Strikes Back comes to a theater near you on May the 21st, 1980.
Now Darth Vader.
They managed to rescue the princess and to destroy the Death Star, but this time, the rebels won't be so lucky. The power of the Death Star was insignificant compared to the power of the Force. And with Obi-Wan Kenobi gone, I am the Master. See it as The Empire Strikes Back.
Ooh, that's scary. Okay, Han Solo.
Till I ran into Ben Kenobi and Luke Skywalker, I had myself a pretty good little operation. They wanted to ride to Alderaan, and they're willing to pay enough so I didn't have to ask any questions. Now I'm in the middle of a rebellion. I'm spending half my time dodging Imperial ships and the other half avoiding Her Holiness. Not only that, but Jabba the Hutt's got a price on my head and he's put Boba Fett on my trail. Something tells me it's not going to get any better when the Empire strikes back.
The destruction of the Death Star was a major victory for the rebellion, but our battle isn't over yet. Darth Vader and the evil forces of the Emperor keep a stranglehold over the galaxy. But the Rebel Alliance must and will succeed in forever ridding the galaxy of their scourge. Even now, in our secret underground base on the ice planet Hoth, new strategies are being planned. See for yourself in The Empire Strikes Back.
The last one is Luke Skywalker.
Tatooine was just a big ball of dust until R2 and 3PO showed up, but since then, my life hasn't been the same. From a moisture farmer on a remote desert planet to a leader of the rebellion fighting for freedom throughout the galaxy. But now the rebellion faces even greater odds, and I must be ready. I must follow Ben Kenobi's teachings, learn more about the powers of the Force and becoming a Jedi Knight, if I'm going to be prepared for a confrontation with Darth Vader. See it, when the Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait for The Empire Strikes Back. That's going to be so good. Well, that's it for Bantha Tracks number 8. Until next time, may the Force be with you.